Okay, it's 2 minutes after the hour, so I think we'll get things going. To our regular attendees, and especially to any of you who are new to Elders Climate Action, welcome. Happy 55th Earth Day. And thank you for joining us for ECA's national call centered on holding fossil fuel polluters and Wall Street enablers accountable. Before doing so, my name is Mark Cook, and I am a co-chair of ECA's Education Committee. For the uninitiated, we are elders determined to do all we can to leave a livable planet for future generations and all life. Our programs, communications, and chapters are focused on engaging elders in solving the climate crisis. At ECA, we are elder-centered and volunteer-driven, seeking to inform, inspire, and engage older generations to act on the climate crisis at the local, state, and federal levels. In the interest of leaving enough time for our presenters, my introduction will be more brief than ECA's promotional content, and if their requests, less formal. We've had a change from our original announcement about this event, in which Renata is graciously filling in for Jamie Han, who could not be with us today. Renata and Griffin are with the Climate Organizing Hub, which is dedicated to ending big oil's destruction of the planet by organizing Black, brown, and immigrant communities who are already facing the worst impacts of climate injustice. By the way, earlier today, Reuters reported that reduction in force letters were sent to nearly 200 employees of the EPA's Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights. First, a little about the Climate Organizing Hub. Through its partnerships, the Climate Organizing Hub holds big oil and Wall Street accountable for getting closer to a just transition away from fossil fuels. Among its mobilizations was the Summer of Heat campaign with 5,000 participants for the first sustained season of civil disobedience targeting Wall Street and resulting in over 700 arrests. They don't mess around. This campaign highlighted the critical role of financial institutions in perpetuating the climate crisis. With that, I'd like to introduce our presenters. Renata is the Deputy Director of the Climate Organizing Hub, leading their communications and digital work and operations, as well as their California campaigns. Renata holds a BBA from the City University of New York and a master's degree in human rights from the University of Barcelona. As for Griffin, after organizing around fossil fuel divestment in college, he became one of the first staffers of New Hampshire 350 and led efforts to stop the construction of a fracking gas pipeline there and instead advance its renewable energy efforts. Currently, Griffin is the campaign manager at Climate Organizing Hub. So without further delay, I will pass things over to Renata and Griffin.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mark, for that wonderful introduction. Thank you, everyone, for making it today on this Earth Day. So today we're going to be talking about how to make polluters pay, even under Trump. And let's go over our agenda for today. We're going to first talk about like the context in which we are in. We're going to talk about like Climate Superfunds, which is like what Make Polluters Pay framework is based on. And we're going to talk about like how to plug in, how to take action. So with that, we're going to dive in. So first of all, for some context, as many of you know, the climate crisis is already here. I personally moved to LA 4 years ago from New York, and was here for like the devastating fires that happened in LA. And I have to say, it was like one of the most awful climate disasters that I've ever experienced. It was like a very apocalyptic to be in LA during this time. It was kind of like a really, even for me that I work in climate, like a really harsh wake up call. that really like we are facing like just really harsh climate chaos right now. Um, and the climate crisis, like it's, as many of you know, is not only causing like the loss of life, displacement, wildlife, many things that are, like irreplaceable. The costs of climate change are also adding up. And specifically, the fires in LA were actually the costliest climate catastrophe that ever happened in the US, costing between 250 billions to 275 billions. But climate catastrophe everywhere is costing us, costing our communities, and costing taxpayers billions of dollars. The snowstorm across the Gulf Coast and Florida this past January, it cost between 14 billion and 17 billion. The historic floodings that just happened in the lower Ohio Valley in April cost between 80 and 90 billion. And Hurricane Helene has cost like 80 billion in damages. Hurricane Milton is estimated to have cost 34 billion in damages and losses, and so on and so forth. So it is our communities and taxpayers that are paying for the damage that big oil is causing. This is very clear to us. We are also facing an affordability crisis with inflation and climate costs driving up the cost of living. Insurance companies are also increasing rates for homeowners, and those same insurance companies are actually also increasing the cost of rents for renters. At the same time, insurance giants are abandoning high-risk areas, forcing the full cost of disasters onto taxpayers. And with all of this, it is also low-income communities and middle-class communities that bear the heaviest burden because we have the fewer resources to adapt to these climate challenges. And I'll pass it up to Griffin to continue.
And to make matters even worse, fossil fuel companies, oil and gas executives, they knew about this. They knew that burning fossil fuels was going to mean more fires, more floods, more lives lost. But also for them, it would mean more profits. So the fact that they are doing this is absolutely obscene. I'm sure most of you know this, but we actually have an incredible opportunity and new mechanism to fight back against this incredibly powerful industry. And that is making them pay for the climate damages that they are causing. Currently, there are 33 states and municipalities that are suing big oil for climate damages. 2 states have already passed laws that make polluters pay, aka Climate Superfunds, and I'll talk about those more in a minute. And there's another 10 states that are considering passing similar laws. So here's the framework. Here's the solution. It's making polluters pay into Climate Superfunds. What is a Climate Superfund? Climate Superfund is based off Congress's creation of their Superfund program, which was established in the 1980s, and it operates on this thing called a polluters pay principle, which is basically just legalese for you need to clean up your own mess. If a polluter pours a bunch of chemicals into a river, they need to clean it up. Climate Superfunds take this same polluters pay principle and apply it to greenhouse gas emissions. So polluters need to pay based on their greenhouse gas emissions over a period of time. States determine the cost of damages caused by climate disasters and then fine fossil fuel companies accordingly. It only applies to big fossil fuel companies, people or corporations who have over 1 billion tons of CO2 emissions. And then the revenue, this is the greatest part, is my favorite part. The revenue that's generated from this is used to invest in climate resiliency, in climate adaptation, it's creating jobs, it's investing in infrastructure. This has already happened in 2 states. New York and Vermont have passed make polluters pay bills or climate superfund laws. And in New York, they're fining fossil fuel companies up to $3 billion a year for the next 25 years. This is a serious blow to the fossil fuel industry. So I'm going to pass back to Renata to get a little bit more into the weeds on climate superfunds. Oh, you're muted, Renata.
Oops, sorry, I forgot about that. So why a climate super fund? Um, so I'm gonna go over like, why this works, like why we're working on this. So first, people love this idea. I love this idea. Make polluters pay is one of our best testing messages against big oil. 70% of Americans want the fossil fuel industry to pay for damages. And it also allows us to play offense on everything from gas prices to climate impacts. And I have to say, like, personally, like with Climate Defenders and Climate Organizing Hub, we organize working class communities of color. And I have to say, sometimes like climate, like campaigns can be a little hard when, like communities are facing like so many other issues. And I can say firsthand, this is one of the most popular campaigns that I've worked on with our base. People get it right away. It just works. They understand it because they understand that they did not cause climate change and that they are paying the biggest price for it. And they understand that it is big oil who needs to pay for this. So second, this is like, very common sense, is disaster preparedness. The demand to make polluters pay provides us with an immediate way to respond to every climate disaster. It also provides us with a tangible action to take in response to events, driving a narrative that it's also about like who's to blame. Um, Also, a climate superfund will allow us to invest in communities. Collected fees would go to state managed funds for climate resilience projects, mitigation, adaptation, just transition support, prioritizing frontline communities and low income neighborhoods and communities of color. States like New York, like Griffin already mentioned, are looking to collect up to $75 billion, while the federal legislation is looking to collect $1 trillion. Also, a climate superfund will shift the cost from communities to the multi-billion-dollar corporations that actually caused climate change in the first place. The oil industry and the groups that they got in their pockets, they love to claim that this will hurt consumers. This is a narrative that like might start to hear, but we want to be clear. There is no justification for big oil to pass this cost onto the consumers. These penalties don't impact their cost of production, and big oil is making record profits and engaging in massive stock buybacks. So they can pay for this. The best way to also control prices, gas prices, is to pass stricter regulation on this industry. Otherwise, they'll continue to make us pay the cost of their profits, which is like, climate catastrophes. Last but not least, the Climate Superfund will provide justice for impacted communities. Low income and communities of color are bearing the brunt of climate impacts, while like big oil is making massive profits. The Climate Superfund proposal will direct 35 to 40% of the funding raised to environmental justice organizations. And there are also like more opportunities to make more targeted investments. And I'll pass it back to Griffin.
So, good news is we're winning. Bad news is we know this because fossil fuel companies, big oil, is fighting back. And we see this really like it's just playing out so clearly, right? So back in October, big oil basically buys $1 billion worth of political favors from Trump during the election. Trump literally says something along the lines of, "I'll give you guys whatever you want, just give me $1 billion." And they do. So fast forward, Trump's getting into office, a bunch of absolutely horrible things happen. In March, all these fossil fuel CEOs, they slither on down to the Oval Office to have a check-in with Trump. And they basically, it was reported that this meeting, all these CEOs are like, we got to deal with these make polluters pay laws. We got to deal with these make polluters pay lawsuits. Like they're coming for our throat. We got to shut this down. And they ask for immunity. And like not even a month later, Trump signs an executive order aimed at giving these big oil companies immunity. And similar to the way that the gun industry and the tobacco industry and the pharmaceutical industry passed legislation at the federal level that stopped states and individuals from holding them accountable for the negative impacts of their business, the fossil fuel industry is trying to do the same exact thing. So part of this executive order that Trump signed says the AG, the Attorney General's office, should figure out a way to somehow stop the enforcement of these laws, which is not really how our legal system works, and that the Attorney General should make recommendations to the Trump administration on both legislative and presidential actions that can be taken to stop these laws that are moving at the state level. So we anticipate that report from the AG's office is due in beginning of June. We anticipate that the AG will be recommending Trump basically push big oil immunity through Congress. And this would be probably something attached to a bigger piece of legislation that basically says it's going to preempt these make polluters pay laws in the states and negate them. We are in an all-out battle right now to stop this thing. But the good news is we actually have a really clear pathway to victory. If we can get the Democrats in the Senate to ensure that this is not on the negotiating table, that nothing around fossil fuel immunity is allowed into any bill, then we can make sure that this doesn't get through the Senate through filibustering it. So that's the rundown on what is happening federally. This is also moving in a ton of states. There's lawsuits moving, a ton of stuff happening. I'm going to give you now the rundown on how to get plugged in. Wouldn't it be wonderful if you all joined us out there? I can't see your faces, but I can only assume y'all are jumping and smiling and so excited about getting plugged in to make polluters pay campaigns, because that's how I felt when I first heard about this. So here's what y'all can do. One, join a state campaign. There are state campaigns in 10 different states. This map is not up to date, so if you don't see your state there, do not fret. I'll send out information after about where there are active campaigns. A couple states, just to name a few. California, their state legislation has just passed through 2 different committees. It's super exciting. There's an awesome coalition around it, a ton of grassroots efforts to pushing this bill. California would be a great place to get plugged in. Oregon is starting to work on this bill. Washington is starting to figure out what this bill could look like next year, along with Minnesota. New Jersey is hosting town halls all over the state this week and next week, getting people plugged into this campaign and starting to contact legislators. The bill there has already been approved through 1 committee and is on its way to more committee hearings. In Maine, the bill is about to be introduced. It's just getting the text finalized. Those hearings should be coming up soon. In Massachusetts, they're also organizing towns all over the state to pass resolutions in support of making polluters pay. And they're doing some really great local organizing where they're talking to the people who run the waste management plant and the people who, are at the shipyard and being like, hey, how are y'all going to be affected by the next storm? And what would you do if you had a couple $1 million to invest in an infrastructure project? What would that look like here? And starting to build real grassroots community support for this. So yeah, we're only on number 1. Join a Make Polluters Pay campaign. We'll send out more info on that. 2, there's not a campaign in your state. Let's introduce a Climate Superfund bill in your state. If you're interested in doing that, you can email me and we can figure out how to do that and what that could look like. 3, you can join me and help fight big oil immunity moving at the federal level. We'll put an interest form in the chat that y'all can fill out if you want to get plugged into that campaign. We also have some quick actions that y'all can do before you hop off this call. And lastly, stay in touch. We have a listserv that y'all can join. Again, I'll drop that link in the chat momentarily as well, and follow-ups. And you can take action right now by asking that your state officials sign on to our sign-on letter that is ensure that is asking Congress to make sure fossil fuel immunity does not get through. I'm going to drop some of those links in the chat, but we would be happy to take any questions.
Okay, I have a couple. So let me, and then they're in different spots, so bear with me a minute because I'm going to check one other spot. Okay, this is from one of our members. What made New York and Vermont's campaigns for Climate Superfund successful? Did they share their strategies with each other?
So I started working on this campaign just towards the tail of end of New York. Um, I think the reason that are the first two states to pass these campaigns is simply because they were the first two states to start working on it. This has proven to be incredibly popular legislation. Vermont, New York, just a little bit ahead of the curve. I will say that in New York, we kind of got stuck in the governor's office, waiting for Governor Hochul to sign this thing. And what it really took was direct action. At the end of the day, we held a sit-in with a ton of people in her office, a ton of constituents. And we had an awesome group led by Third Act New York and some fellow elders who said, we're not going to leave here until you sign this bill. This is really important. They ended up being arrested and dragged out by the police. And shortly thereafter, a couple days later, Hochul said, all right, I'll sign the bill. This seems pretty important to you all.
I would also add, and I can't speak so much on Vermont, but like on New York, I feel like aside from like what Griffin mentioned, it was like a very wide and diverse coalition, intergenerational coalition. Like, Griffin mentioned there was like some third actors, and there was also Fridays for Future, which was like high school kids, right? There was a lot of community groups, communities of color in New York that supported that bill. So it was not only seen as like this like small like fringe like climate bill. It was seen like something that had like broad support. And I think like like looking at it from here, like what happened in New York, I think like that was key in into like the bill getting signed by the governor.
Okay, thank you. Let me, I'm kind of putting these in a document as we go. So one question is, how can states attribute specific catastrophes or losses to specific fuel companies? Won't the companies say it was others?
That is exactly what these companies are trying to do. They have sued New York and Vermont, but apparently they don't feel very good about their chances considering they're going over to the Oval Office and begging for immunity. But to answer your question a little bit more directly, and I'll be upfront that I am not in the policy weeds of this. But basically, my understanding of how it works is states can set a specific time frame. So, right, it's like fossil fuel emissions that were released over this specific time frame, and if it was over 1 billion tons, then you are going to be held responsible for what we anticipate as the damages and the cost of the damages that will accrue from disasters. So different states take different approaches. In Vermont, they basically said, okay, cool, we want to do this. We are going to have our basically our state EPA figure out the best way to crunch the numbers here, so that we can send out fines accordingly. New York had done a study around this exact topic a couple years earlier, so they just referenced that study in their bill, and that's why New York already has a price tag on what they're finding and how much they expect to raise. So in short, it's based on their percentage of overall emissions during a specific time period.
And I would also add, Griffin, that like our framework, like also like I think like policy and like messaging wise is targeting the big oil. Like we constantly talk about like big oil is responsible for it, right? Like, and I there's a framework, right? Like it's like any like company that issued over 1 billion CO2 emissions, right? So this is already like, targeting like the biggest oil corporations. And I think it's very important to target them as an industry.
This is sort of my own question along with what both of you have just said. And is it big oil exclusively as opposed to coal or to natural gas?
No, it is all of the above. It is fossil fuel companies. The reason that we are using big oil is because, to be really blunt, like it polls better. Like people know what you're talking about. They have more of a clear vision in their head of who those people are and what they're doing than when you say fossil fuel companies. That a lot of people, it's hard because we're so in the depths of the climate and we're like, of course, the fossil fuel industry. But a lot of like regular people out there like don't actually know what the fossil fuel industry is, but they know what big oil is and they don't like the sound of it.
Okay. I'll read one comment from someone and then get to the next question. It says the Colorado Public Utility Commission is allowing Excel to charge ratepayers $1.9 billion to pay for wildfire mitigation. And that was kind of a question I had. Is this all sort of based on past emissions or future emissions? And does this cover protect, I guess, polluters from being sued for specific things after they've occurred if they've already been contributing to a fund like this?
So I'm not a lawyer. Legally, I think it's like a little bit unclear at the moment, and there are people who are bringing civil suits against the fossil fuel industry for specific damages. So I think part of the answer to that question depends on how those shake out and where, are they suing? Do they live in a state that has make polluters pay laws on the books already? I think are like questions that would need to be answered to kind of pinpoint on that question. Um, and sorry, what was the part of your question before that, Mark?
Well, oh boy, I myself have lost track. Yeah, I guess to just again, if they're sort of paying ahead, knowing that current activities are creating climate damage, and then if there is a specific crisis or event that occurs, they could still be sued. I mean, that's probably just stuff that is evolving, I guess.
Yes, exactly. And the other part of your question was, is it based on former emissions, future emissions? It is based on past emissions.
Okay.
But then
Okay.
those fines can be used for future climate disasters.
One of our folks on here says, how do we find out how much our own state has to pay or is paying for climate damages? I would like to write an LTE, letter to the editor, or two about this. Such a good point to keep getting out there along with support for Superfund legislation.
So my understanding, and Griffin, please elaborate, like the way that the legislation is written is that each state does its own study in order to determine like how much like it's had to pay for climate damages. In like the case of New York, like they determined that that was 75 billion, right? Like in the case of California, they would have to the state will have to conduct a study to determine like how much in climate damages from like it cost them in the past. um yeah, I don't know if you have anything else to add on that,
I
Griffin.
think that's exactly right. And the only thing I would add is the question of how much are we paying right now when our, taxes go up to help rebuild roads that were taken out during a flood. That is a really good question. It's a question I have been trying to get to the bottom of, and it is a huge research project. And we have not, I don't have a number for the person who asked that question, but I would love to talk with them more, especially if they can do some research in their state and come up with a figure on that.
Okay, another question. Given your name, the Climate Organizing Hub, one of the questions is, are there other climate/environmental organizations you are working with that we can also connect with in our states? In other words, I guess that's kind of what you're doing is you are organizing with other organizations. Yours isn't alone trying to advance this kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Like we have organizations that we work with predominantly right now in New York, in California, starting to do more work in the Midwest, particularly in Minnesota. Griffin is based in Maine, so he's working with like groups in Maine. Um, and we are starting to get connected also with groups in Florida. So like I think someone shared Griffin's email there, and like maybe we can be like get a more specific question about like which state, and we can forward like what groups we are connected with there. And we also work with national groups also that actually have people everywhere, like Third Act, and Stop the Money Pipeline, and like many groups that are national.
Okay. Um, Another question is how can we reach out to our members of Congress to help convince them to block any immunity law? Sounds like a Climate Action Now action, maybe. Or to find out those who are considering, even the states that are considering immunity law blocking.
Right. So in the coming weeks, we're working with some folks in DC that are going to be circulating what's called a Dear Colleagues letter. And it's basically a letter that anyone can sign on to that urges party leadership or congressional leadership to do a thing. So we should have kind of a more clear answer in the next month or so around which Democratic senators have signed on to the Dear Colleagues letter and which have not. In the meantime, what we've been doing is urging local elected officials to sign on to our like Dear Colleagues letter that we'll be sending around to everyone so that you could have your state rep or your city councilor signed on to the letter going to your state senator saying, hey, can you make sure this thing doesn't pass? So that's the ask right now. And if you sign up on our list, we do have a click to email like in the works that we'll be launching shortly where you can contact your own representative saying, hey, please make sure big oil immunity doesn't make it through the Senate.
Okay, yeah, excellent. Griffin's put his email in, and then Ariana has also put some things in the chat for action. So there's that to look for that could help. Let's see, I'm looking. Um, yeah, and this is, I think you've kind of touched on this. It says, do you have resources for folks who want to push for local actions? I guess this is in cities and towns. Does this have to be a bigger picture thing, like statewide as opposed to cities and towns?
So cities and towns are passing resolutions in support of this legislation. Typically that's happening in places where like, statewide legislation is in the works. So I would say, again, shoot me an email. A big part of what my work is going to look like over the next few months is helping prepare people to run statewide campaigns next legislative session to make sure that we can pass these bills. Um, so I'd love to help you and get plugged in on that and connect you with other people who might already be up and running around this in your state.
Okay. Bear with me. I am looking for other things I may have missed. One thing, if I just want to clarify and to see if I understand correctly. Um, It sounds like on some of these Superfund things, they don't have to be in response to a catastrophic event and to pay for damages. It can be proactive where it can be used to do some of the stuff, not just what that FEMA would do after the fact, but to this resiliency and adaptation, those kinds of initiatives and efforts. Is that right? The Superfund monies
Yes,
they can be used for
yes,
things before they
abs
happen.
absolutely. Like, yes, one of the legislation can be used, the Climate Superfund can be used for climate resiliency. And it's, yeah.
Yeah, I actually think Massachusetts has a really cool bill right now, and part of the framework that they're doing is that people would be able to apply for grants out of the Climate Superfund. So, you know, if you're from some small town and you're like, hey, you know, we got a bridge and this river is pretty close to it, and I think the next time, you know, there's a big rainstorm, it might take out the bridge. You could apply to the Superfund and get a grant to redo the bridge. Or if you're, you know, a local business or a community group, you could also apply to this fund. So there's a lot of versatility in how these funds can be used, and it really depends on what the legislation looks like between states.
Okay, another person asked, how serious are the lawsuits against New York and Vermont on their Climate Superfund acts? I get the feeling that these are scaring states off, i.e. Connecticut's bill getting rejected.
Yeah, I mean, you know, big oil is scary. Like they're really powerful. And like I understand why there's like state legislators in, you know, places like Connecticut or, you know, wherever that are like, I'm scared that my state's gonna get sued by big oil. Um, but the thing is, like, we need to do it anyway. Like, yeah, it's gonna be scary. Did you think it was not gonna be scary to like take on one of the most powerful industries in the history of the world that has billions and billions of dollars at their disposal? Like, no, it's gonna be hard. It's gonna be scary. We still need to do it, especially in these times.
Okay,
Yeah,
and
and just to add to that, I think climate catastrophe is also really fucking scary. So,
there you go. It's just, yeah, it's convincing everybody about that until it's happened to them. Uh,
mhm.
Can we prevent damages costs from being passed on to consumers? In other words, it really comes out of profits, I guess, comes out of stockholder returns or something, as opposed to us. Um, I mean, yeah, consumers who might have investments in fossil fuels and that sort of thing.
So, I mean, like, so what we are arguing is that this cost shouldn't be passed on to consumer because it really doesn't affect like their production. And again, like they're making like billions and billions of dollars in profit, so they could complete like they can afford to pay for the damage that they've caused. You know, the other thing that we are also arguing is that, you know, like what will prevent basically like the fossil fuel industry to pass the cost on to consumers, which by the way, like basically like in that case they could do at any time is stronger regulation, right? So we should be arguing also for stronger regulation of the fossil fuel industry to not be like passing on these costs to the consumer. But again, it shouldn't pass. You know, they shouldn't have to pass the costs on to consumers.
Yeah, another I'll drop this in the chat. It's a letter that a Nobel Prize winning economist wrote to Governor Hochul as he was trying to make this decision on this exact issue. And he explains what Renata just explained. He also explains that it's kind of challenging for a global industry like, you know, the oil industry to say, okay, well, this state is fining me, so I'm going to make it more expensive. I'm going to make oil more expensive in this state, right? You can't like set the price per barrel of oil to be different in Maryland than you can in New Hampshire. So check out that article. There's some really great additional information there from an actual economist on this topic.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. So that is available in the chat for anybody who wants to see that, and for those who might be watching the recording of this later on. I guess, you know, another thing I'm sort of wondering about is, um, I don't know if it falls to your organization or what, but sort of seeing what the different states, California, Oregon, Vermont, you know, that what they've done and where they've had success, and sort of making that sort of a blueprint for other states, because ultimately, the ones that are going to be toughest are the oil exporting states and domestic oil exporting states. Oklahoma, Texas, you know, maybe not Wyoming, although I mean they're not gas producing, but a lot of coal. But anyway, you know, just finding that framework so that states, as more states do it, I think it's going to put pressure on the states that are most conflicted in this because they have those kinds of resources and we're still addicted to them. So yeah, I guess the question is, are you aggregating kinds of, and in terms of just if somebody wants to start something in their own state, and is there a blueprint, a generalized blueprint being established for how to make this more likely to see it succeed or get traction?
So there's model legislation that has been drafted. You know, one of the interesting things about this is that the Make Polluters Pay campaign has seen an incredible amount of decentralized support. After the LA wildfires, there were Make Polluters Pay bills popping up all over the country, and we had a really hard time even keeping track of them all. So, you know, we are trying to build more infrastructure and support systems to help states that want to pass this legislation, groups, and as well as legislators and just individual activists that want to move on this. Um, and I would also say like the blueprint isn't there yet. There's a lot of experimenting we need to do. I think after this legislative session, we'll have a much clearer idea of what it looks like. But there's really only 2 states that have passed this right now. So I think we'll learn a lot in the coming months as we see how things shake out in other states.
Okay, this is from one of our lawyers, but so are there ways for the fossil fuel companies to pay the Superfund money without having to formally admit responsibility? Because if they do admit responsibility, that then plays out in every other jurisdiction as an admission of fault.
We have some great partners at the Center for Climate Integrity that have been leading on the legal end of this that I'm sure would be so stoked to answer that question. Um, I don't know enough about like the legal implications of admitting and paying into this fund. So I don't think I could totally answer that question. But I think it will be, you know, really interesting to see how these lawsuits play out because you know, fossil fuel industry is trying to get these lawsuits shut down. If they do play out, if they do go to court, I think that the fossil fuel industry and big oil will be put in a very challenging position to try to prove that they are not at fault and that they didn't know about this because they are at fault and they've known about this for decades. So very excited to hopefully see that play out in a courtroom.
Okay, yeah, on a question and a comment in chat. In an effort, this is just a comment in chat, in an effort to erode public support for the Climate Superfund bills in California, Phillips Petroleum and Valero have announced that they are now planning to close down 2 major refineries in the state. So yeah, I don't know if that's just a way, sort of a vengeful kind of move or what, but that's
Well, I mean, I would also add, yeah, I hadn't heard about that, but it's interesting. I would also say that a lot of these refineries, the communities want them shut down because of like the pollution that they create, which, you know, like as many of you know, like many of these refineries are in communities of color, which, you know, like then like these communities have high rates of cancer and asthma. So these are, you know, like I know that many of these refineries, the community has been fighting for them to shut down. So I'm not sure it's like as much as, you know, like I would almost see this as a, you know, like as a victory for like the local communities there, but not sure if like there was like that second intention of you know, sort of like a get you at the Climate Superfund.
yeah, it almost seems like in any of these frameworks that are put together, you would have to prevent outsourcing. For instance, companies move their labor out of the United States in order to, because it wasn't regulated, they may not have had to pay as much, and they could try to do the same thing with refining, I suppose. And so that if a state does do that, or that there are restrictions from fossil fuel companies to do that outside the United States and then re-import that refined product back into our country. Another question: what are the worst case consequences to states of suits filed against them by the fossil fuel industries? What are the costs required to defend the laws and the possible penalties if they are ruled against?
Again, we are very much leading on the legislative side of this, and I
Okay.
think y'all gonna have a whole other call with some folks from CCI to talk about the legal strategy because it's really interesting. I don't know a ton about it. My basic understanding of that question is the fossil fuel governments are suing to shut down the laws. There's obviously costs associated with defending these laws. That's the job of AGs. They should be doing that. They should be so excited to get to be a part of this fight. Um, but I don't know the salaries of the AGs and the specific costs associated with the lawsuits.
Yeah, I realize we do realize you're an organizer and not you don't necessarily have all the legalese behind all of this stuff. It's really kind of mind-boggling, frankly. Okay, let's see. How can we get engaged and energized to help out with organizing on this in different states? Again, I think is that just reaching out to you and you'll kind of help us get the ball rolling?
Yeah, reach out to me. I dropped my email in the chat. I'm also gonna send the slides to hopefully they can get out to everyone after the show. And there is a slide that it's at the end of the deck. We didn't see it, but it has contact emails for all the people who are leading in different states. So if you're in Massachusetts, you can reach out to Better Future Project, Food and Water Watch in New Jersey, Center for Biological Diversity in California. But all that information will be on the slides that folks get sent to.
A question I sort of have with all this non-DEI stuff, um, occurring. Uh, at the same time, this is evolving and developing, and we're trying to make sure, like the Superfund money in these states and any others that develop them, actually go to the companies most impacted, who are. It's kind of related to DEI. I guess it's just one more fight you're going to have to sort of navigate. Is it clear what I'm saying? In other words, if part of the Superfund stuff is to help communities that have been most harmed, they are marginalized communities, and DEI is kind of at this point in time being sort of targeted. I guess that's just one more thing to finesse with proposed legislation.
Yeah, I mean, I really think that, like the DEI has been like such a distraction also, and like sort of like a messaging gimmick also by the Trump administration. But yeah, I mean, I think in New York and in California, which are the cases that I'm most familiar with, definitely like there's the language of like that, the Climate Superfund could go to the communities most impacted by climate change. And here in California, and as well as like in New York, we worked with a lot of communities of color and and environmental justice groups. And same here in California. So that's very much like continues to be a part of the legislation. And I think it's very popular, and like it just works in the state. I think like as we like maybe go to more purple states, or like like red states, like then like we might have to like figure out like what narratives and like what legislative strategies work for those states. I don't know if that answers your question. Sort of my take.
Yeah, and I think we've kind of run out of questions, but maybe you could just conclude a little bit with your own personal stories about how you wound up in this particular line of work. I mean, I think folks would be interested in just you sharing that.
I can start us off. Um, what a long, crazy trip it's been. I think my story kind of starts out as I'm entering high school. The 2008 financial collapse happens. My dad was a carpenter. He built beautiful homes, the kind of homes that people got sold with subprime mortgages. So when the economy collapsed, he lost his job. And I just got really hung up as like a early high schooler, like 13 years old. I was like, what do you mean like your retirement fund's gone? Like where did it go? Money doesn't just like disappear. Like who took it? And I just kept like digging and trying to learn as much as I could about this stuff and like came to realize that it was like a small group of really wealthy people who decided that their money was more important than like the well-being of people like my dad and my family and families all over the country. And the more I kind of got involved in anti-war organizing and in my community, I saw that same story playing out everywhere, whether it was the pharmaceutical industry and the CEOs of those companies that made the decisions that they wanted to make more money at the expense of people, or the fossil fuel industry who said, "Ah, we'll let the world burn because we'll make an extra buck." So I saw that play out and got involved in my fossil fuel divestment campaign in college and did some organizing in New Hampshire, helped launch a youth-led group in New Hampshire called New Hampshire Youth Movement that organized around elections and worked to build bases and pass legislation. And then got mixed up with Renata over the Climate Organizing Hub and been causing trouble with them ever since.
That's a great story, Griffin. I can't believe I actually haven't heard of that one. Um, so wow, like yeah, this is like I don't even know where to start. But I'll just, like I'll just share that I come from an immigrant background. I grew up in Dominican Republic. My parents are immigrants from the Dominican Republic and moved to New York and like lived, like my mom like got her job like it was a minimum wage job, right? Like we lived in like a tiny apartment in New York and could barely afford the rent. So it was like very like always like very conscious of like the economic injustices, and also like racial injustices. I actually started in advertising because I really just wanted like a good paying job and to get out of poverty, and then like quickly realized this was like not like working for corporations. Like I quickly like realized that it was like a very cutthroat environment, and like that just corporations were constantly trying to exploit people. So like that was like very clear to me, and that's when I decided to move to Spain, and I did a human rights program there, and got really involved in different movements in Spain. And then when I got back to New York, I got involved in Occupy Wall Street, and that was like the biggest mobilization. Maybe like many people like sort of like that was like their first major like mobilization movement. And when I got involved in Occupy, I got to meet with amazing community organizers. And one of them was New York Communities for Change, which is being led by actually our was being led at the time by our current Indian founder of the Climate Organizing Hub, Jonathan Weston. I got involved with the Fight for 15, working to, like raise the minimum wage of fast food workers. Um, yeah, and like, also got involved with like fighting also subprime mortgages. Saw many like members lost their homes because of like subprime mortgages, and like like learn quickly like who are the culprits of all of this, like from economic justice, for you like not being able to afford your housing, for us like not being able to like not have healthcare or like go into medical debt. Like you constantly saw that like the culprits were like the same types of people and corporations. So I've been doing economic justice work since then, and then actually started the climate program at New York Communities for Change. This was after Hurricane Sandy hit hit New York City, which affected like many of our members. Helped pass the Green New Deal there in New York. And yeah, and now that I'm a mom, and it's just become like, you know, basically like one of like the, you know, big existential crisis, and like, you know, just trying to find like the intersection of, you know, climate, economic justice, and racial justice with this work. I hope
Yeah.
that wasn't too long.
No, but how did you two meet? Did you meet at one of these events or something? The two of you? Just
No,
through the organization?
Griffin was too young, I think, to be at Occupy, right? No, Griffin, we were actually free. So Climate Hub was hired your friend Griffin to freelance with us, and then she recommended you, and that's how we brought Griffin to the Climate Organizing Hub. He was our first hire.
Yeah. For the record, I did go down to Boston, Occupy Boston for a day for a high school
Oh,
project.
okay.
So I got
There
a
you
little
go.
taste.
Okay, so you did get involved in Occupy.
Yeah. Okay, well, look, you know, we really appreciate, first of all, what you've presented, answering the questions, particularly the technical ones, as best you could. We appreciate your personal stories, and so on behalf of ECA and our attendees, we just want to thank you for your willingness to step up on late notice with the important content you shared with us today, consistent with ECA's published justice and anti-racism statement. So that concludes our program today. And for those of you who are still on, we hope you will stay on for the action party after that. And Renata and Griffin, thanks again so much for visiting with us today and sharing your work. And we wish you the best of luck. And you know we're behind you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for
Thanks so
inviting
much.
us.
Yeah, hope to talk with y'all more soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We are not seeing the folks from Climate. Oh, here's Climate Action Now. Hi, Kaylee. We're gonna first, before we move to Climate Action Now on our action party, we're gonna put a few actions in the chat. I've already put them in before, but I'm gonna throw them in again. There's three. One in particular is from our presenters that we just had, encouraging you to hold Big Oil accountable, tell your elected officials to hold Big Oil accountable. We also have one of our own actions from ECA that is a federal action telling Congress to not let polluters off the hook. I just dropped that in the chat box. And then we have a third action that is targeted at state and local level officials, asking them to also make polluters pay. So there's three actions already in the chat box that you can take in the spirit of what we've talked about today. But we also have a slew of additional actions with Climate Action Now. So Kaylee, I want to pass the mic over to you to talk a little bit about our action party tonight.
Yes, hello everyone and happy Earth Day. Sorry to be a couple minutes late, just getting here from our other Climate Action Now action party. So very literally eventful day for us at the Climate Action Now team. I am Kaylee Beam, Climate Action Now's Director of Content, and I believe Liz Bridgewater, our Director of Outreach, will be joining us soon. She's just wrapping up things at our other event. But yeah, I'm the one who works with our wonderful volunteer team to get the actions that some of the actions that you're going to take tonight to get those live in the app. And I also publish our weekly newsletters. So I'm going to go ahead and share our goal tracker for tonight and get you all ready to take some action. All right. So you should be seeing it now. And what we're looking at is on the left side, we have this little globe that's going to fill in and iterate as we take action together. And then on the right side is the QR code, which is what you're going to scan to get into tonight's the campaign for tonight's event. So feel free to go to get your phone or your tablet, go to whatever app or you usually use to take photos, usually your camera app, and hold that up to the QR code. There should be a little pop-up on your screen that says Climate Action Now. And if you tap on that, it will take you to the App Store to download if you don't have the app, or it will take you right to tonight's campaign if you do, which is our Make Polluters Pay campaign. So if you're having trouble, the QR code isn't working, don't worry. I'll be dropping some links in the chat that you can use to take action that way. And I will also put this little short link. You can type this into your phone browser if you still want to try and get in the app and the QR code's not working. Just like the QR code, it takes you to tonight's campaign if you have the app, or to the App Store to download if you don't. So I will drop this short link in the chat, and then I also have some other links to share for people who'd rather not get on the app and just want to participate via web forms.
And today of all days is an important day to take action, Earth Day, and it seems like you've been busy today, Kaylee. I hope you're getting a lot of actions.
Yeah, we so our regular action parties are an hour long. And I think we were able to take 700 actions together, or that's where we were at when I hopped off that call. So pretty great. That one was focused on building decarbonization and accelerating building decarb at all, levels of government, and also in your own home. And also targeting corporations. So got some really good actions out of that. And sorry, I am talking, so I'm not getting these web forms in the chat. 1 second. So here's the short link you can use if you still want to get into the app but the QR code's not working. And now I'm going to drop our first web form link in the chat, which is, in the spirit of making polluters pay, tell your state leaders to support a Climate Superfund law. Now, I do not think this, depending on where you live, obviously this won't be available for everyone, because I believe California, Maryland, Massachusetts have laws in progress, and obviously New York and Vermont already have some, but still going to drop that in the chat, so that's an option for those of you who don't live in those states. And our next one after that is going to be petitioning major news stations to report on Louisiana's big win against Chevron. They were recently triumphant in a lawsuit against Chevron, and I think will receive $747 million or something like that, following damage to their coastal wetlands. So that was definitely a big win and an underreported story. So that's a petition you can sign to encourage more news media outlets to spread the word.
So Kaylee, I have a question. If I just get into the Climate Action Now app, I've never had luck with this QR code, but if I'm in there now and I do an action, does it show up in the actions taken here, or am I kind of off the grid, so to speak?
So if it's one of the actions that is set up as part of this campaign, then it will affect the goal tracker. But if it's outside of the campaign, then the goal tracker will not increase even if you take an action. So the QR code hasn't been working for you?
Yeah, right now then I should be in the campaigns and the actions there. Okay. Yeah, I don't know why that QR code has not worked for me.
Sometimes QR codes are hard. Also, hi, I'm here. As well. I'm but I was
Welcome,
here a little
Liz.
late coming from another event. But I'm the director of outreach at Climate Action Now, and put together a lot of our action parties, and along with Kaylee. Mark, I just wanted to say on your point about QR codes, I think we normally can access our campaigns from the campaign section of the app as well. Kaylee, do you know if that is the case with this particular campaign, or did we not set it up that way?
I think I forgot to toggle it on yesterday. My apologies. Going forward, I'll make sure, so we can avoid any more QR code troubles, that'll be another way that everyone here can access those actions.
Liz,
so good shout, Liz.
It looks like we have a question in the chat for you about where did you learn about building decarbonization? Could you just talk a little bit more about the event that you did a little earlier? And I know ECA also has an action about building decarbonization, so I can put that in the chat, whoever was interested in that, but would love to hear about your event earlier as well.
Yeah, definitely.
You want to take this one, Liz, or?
Yeah, I can start.
Okay.
Yeah, so we just had an action party, which if anyone didn't register but you want to see it, feel free to just shoot me an email. I can drop my email in the chat and I'll give you the recording tomorrow. But that was with a couple different panelists. So we had someone named Kevin Cho, who's the CEO and founder of this new nonprofit focused on plug-in solar. So that's a really interesting type of solar technology that's gotten really popular in Germany and is now starting to become more accessible in the US, but it's super early days for that technology. and it's considered just like sort of plug and play solar, sometimes called plug-in solar, sometimes called backyard solar. But the idea there is that it's just like a relatively small amount of electricity that you could use to like power like your fridge, your basic home appliances, basically the scope of what you would have in an average home outside of your AC, since that's super energy intensive. So we heard from him a little bit about that new type of technology that they're trying to make more accessible. And then we also had two folks from groups that help homeowners and just like the US markets generally scale for electrification. So that was Electrify Now and a really amazing group called Rewiring America. So these were both organizations that just connect people with resources to help make it easier to decarbonize in your own home if you're a homeowner and have that at your disposal. They had some good advice for renters as well, which is the situation I'm in. So I was super curious to hear that because I feel like I don't hear as much about that always. And yeah, it was just like a really nice conversation, I think, to hear from folks. And one of the reasons we had chosen that for Earth Day is because homes really are a huge part of the emissions. I think we had a statistic that was something like 12% of global greenhouse gas emissions are from residential buildings. So it's a pretty solid chunk of global emissions, and there's a lot of individual autonomy as well as systems level change that can happen to reduce those emissions. So it's a good topic area, I think, with lots of hopeful potential to move forward.
Good to know. Thank you. It's really interesting. And I did drop ECA's building decarbonization action in the chat for any of you that are interested as well.
Oh, awesome. I'm totally gonna check that out. Just opened the link up right here.
Getting those web forms in the chat. So let's see. I keep the links in a separate document, so I don't know what this one is off the top of my head, but the one I just put in is tell your Congress members don't let polluters and their allies define our futures. So pretty straightforward, you know, but very important to remind our legislators during this time what we care about and that we're, you know, paying attention. So that's another one that we've got in the carousel for tonight.
I'm curious, since it's Earth Day for folks on the call, if anyone has anything really fun they've done for Earth Day, like tree planting or going to an event like this, I would just be curious if you want to drop it in the chat as we take some action.
That's a fun idea, Liz. Earth Day traditions. I've never really thought about it, but I feel like Earth Day needs its own set of traditions, just like any other holiday you could think of. Ooh, a collage.
Gosh, that sounds awesome.
Okay, may we ask a follow-up question? What were you collaging together?
Oh, I think Kaylee, we might be having some of the actions might be lagging. You know, I'm wondering, since we just had our action party separate from this, maybe our servers aren't scaling as much as they normally do. So if you guys are seeing a lag, like a disconnect between how many actions you're taking and the goal tracker, we might be having a slight technical issue on the back end. But one of the things that we really appreciate about being able to do these events with y'all and these national calls is getting feedback. So for the folks who have put that in the chat, thank you for dropping that in, and we'll mention that to our chief engineer since we have a new auto scaling server thing, and maybe it's not scaling as
Auto
much.
scaling
Yeah.
properly. Yes, in the chat I see someone, it's saying you don't have an attorney general. So there's a good chance that, so we have a third-party service that we use to basically have our users send messages to their legislators, and based on the address you put in the app, they pull up your representatives. There is a list of probably 10 to 15, maybe a little less than that, attorney generals that just do not provide an email address. So that's why in some cases which I think your DC case might be one of those. Unfortunately, it's just on the side of our third-party system. So sometimes there are some bugs like that. I will say I'm seeing some other great ways of celebrating Earth Day in the chat. Francis got first big piece of home decarbonization done with that electrical panel and wiring. That's awesome. Someone took a forest walk. Love that. I feel like that's really what it is all about. I feel like as a work from homer, I don't always step outside, but I really should, you know, hop off after this call and go for a nice walk because the weather's beautiful.
I feel like there's something special about being among the trees too, right? Like, the walk on its own is good, but the trees just really make it something.
All right. Okay, got.
For the two of you, Kaylee and Liz, are you in the west or the east part of the country?
We're both West Coast. I'm Southern
Okay.
California.
Okay.
And
So you've got time to go do something after this.
it's true. Yeah.
Yes, and yeah, I'm out in Portland, Oregon. Recently got here and have been loving it. Lots of big trees here, which was one of the reasons we wanted to come here. So very grateful for that.
You can
Looks
find
like you're
quite a bit of inspiration in our chat here. I think a collage sounds like a very fun way to celebrate. I'm thinking about that for next year for sure.
Right. I think that technically counts as upcycling, right? So
Yeah, for sure, depending on how you do it, totally.
well, Casey, I feel like if you want to add any more details about this collage in the chat, you would have a captive audience. Final few minutes.
I don't know if you saw this, but in the chat, somebody wrote, I've taken several actions that aren't getting counted. Just FYI, we are making progress. And first thing every morning, I take 5 to 10 actions via your amazing Climate Action Now app. So you do have fans.
Yeah, thank you for flagging that. We'll definitely share some feedback with our chief engineer, since I think our servers aren't scaling as much as they should right now. And also, Jim, I love to hear that you take action, 5 to 10 actions every morning. That's really awesome. I feel like whenever I take action, it normally ends up being like with coffee is somehow involved. So maybe we align on
that morning routine. That's awesome.
Yeah.
We're nearing the end here, so if you haven't gotten any, try to wrap up your last minute actions as we are closing out our call. Thank you so much, Kaylee and Liz, for leading our action party session here, and hopefully we can see the number go up a little more next time, just from the lag or whatever the issue is. But still exciting to see that I would assume, have met at least half that goal.
Oh yeah. And what I will say, it's Earth Day. I feel like everyone deserves some fireworks, so I might just hack the system a little bit, if you'll forgive me. And go ahead and make that goal 70. And look at that, everybody. Everyone on this call is working really hard, so everyone deserves fireworks.
Well, thank you. Amazing job, everyone. And thank you so much for joining us tonight. Please be sure to tune in next month for our next national call and action party. Have a great night, all.
Thank you, Kaylee.
Bye.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you, everyone, and happy Earth Day. Enjoy the rest of your evenings.
Thanks. Happy Earth Day.
Thank you.